Watch this fireball closely. What you're seeing right now is not the moment the bomb hit. The bomb already landed almost 2 seconds before this explosion reaches the surface. Everything blowing up out of this hillside in Iran is not the strike itself. It is the missiles, the launchers, and the crates of weapons that Iran spent years burying under solid rock, because someone in Tehran believed depth meant safety. It did not. It only meant the fire had a longer way to travel before it broke through the ground. For 13 nights in a row, footage like this played again and again. Coastal missile bunkers, underground drone tunnels, naval storage sites used by Iran's most powerful forces. All of it getting hit night after night, in one of the biggest bombing campaigns this region has seen in years. And then, just a few days ago, it suddenly stopped. Not because the military ran out of targets. It stopped because a diplomatic door opened, and the people running this operation decided it was worth pausing to see if Iran actually wants to talk, or if this is just another delay tactic while they wait for the world to look away. We are going to get into whether that pause will actually hold. But first, we need to talk about the weapon that changed everything in the final 2 weeks of this campaign, because there is a new bomb involved. And it is the reason those underground bunkers in Iran stopped being a safe place to hide anything. Before this bomb showed up, Iran's plan made sense on paper. Bury your weapons deep enough, cover them in enough concrete, and even a direct hit from a normal 2,000-pound bomb might just crack the surface while the real stockpile underneath stays untouched. That plan worked for years. It stopped working the moment American aircraft started dropping a 5,000-pound bomb built for exactly one job, punching through hardened bunkers that older weapons could not reach. Over the last few weeks, this bomb has been used again and again against storage sites along the coast near the Strait of Hormuz, tearing through bunkers that were built to survive a war like this and mostly did not survive it at all. So stay with us, because in this video we are going to break down exactly what this bomb is, how it compares to the much bigger bunker busters people already know about, which aircraft are actually allowed to carry it, and what 13 nights of this campaign have actually achieved on the ground. We will also walk through how a strike like this actually gets built, step by step, because the bomb itself is only the final piece. Before it, there's a long chain of aircraft, jamming systems, and coordination that all has to work perfectly, or the mission fails. We will also get into what is happening with the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, because that part of the story matters just as much as the bombs falling from the sky. And near the end, we will take a quick look at a few other things happening around the world right now, because there is a lot moving outside of Iran too. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, drop a like on this video. It genuinely helps push this kind of coverage to more people trying to understand what is actually happening, instead of just scrolling past headlines. Now let's start with the bomb itself, because this is one of the most important developments of the entire campaign. And once you understand what it can actually do, you will understand exactly why Iran's old strategy of burying everything underground just stopped working. This bomb has a name most people have never heard before. It's called the GBU-72, and inside the military it's also known as the Advanced 5K Penetrator. Until this year, it had never actually been dropped on a real target. It was tested back in 2021, released from an F-15E fighter jet during trials in Florida, and after that, it just sat in storage. A weapon built for a very specific job, but never actually used until now. That changed when American forces dropped it for the first time on hardened Iranian positions, holding anti-ship missiles along the coast. Since then, it has quietly become one of the most important weapons of this entire operation, even though most news coverage barely mentions it by name. Here's why this bomb matters so much. For a long time, the American bunker-busting toolkit basically had two choices and nothing in between. On one side, there was the GBU-28, an older bomb weighing about 2,000 pounds. It could punch through roughly 20 feet of reinforced concrete or about 100 feet of packed earth. Useful, but limited, especially against the kind of deeply buried sites that a country like Iran has spent decades building. On the other side, there was the GBU-57, the massive ordnance penetrator. This thing is a genuine monster, weighing around 30,000 pounds, and it can tear through more than 200 feet of solid concrete, or close to 260 feet of solid rock. This is the exact bomb that was used against Iran's Fordo nuclear site, a facility buried so deep inside a mountain that basically nothing smaller could have reached it. But here's the catch. The GBU-57 only fits on one aircraft in the entire world, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, and America only has 19 of them. You simply cannot run a nightly campaign, hitting hundreds of targets, using a bomber that rare and that valuable. That's the exact gap the GBU-72 was built to close. It sits right in the middle. A 5,000-pound bomb that combines a hardened, penetrating warhead with a modified GPS guidance kit, giving it enough accuracy to land right on target, and enough weight to punch through whatever is buried underneath before it goes off. It's not meant to go after a mountain fortress like Fordo. It's meant for exactly what has been happening over the last 2 weeks. Mid-level hardened bunkers, coastal missile storage, underground drone hangars, the kind of target Iran has built hundreds of all across the country to protect its ballistic missile and anti-ship arsenal. And this is the part that really matters. This bomb is cleared for aircraft that can fly the same mission again and again, night after night. That is the entire difference between a one-time symbolic strike and a real sustained campaign that actually wears down a military's capability over time. Right now, only 2 aircraft in the American fleet are cleared to carry the GBU-72, the F-15E Strike Eagle, which is where it was first tested years ago, and the B-1B Lancer, which is where this story gets a lot more interesting. The B-1 was originally designed back in the 1970s and 80s as a fast, low-flying nuclear bomber meant to sneak under Soviet radar during the Cold War. That mission disappeared decades ago, along with the Soviet Union, but what was left behind turned out to be one of the most useful conventional bombers America has ever flown. Each B-1 can carry up to 75,000 pounds of precision weapons, more than any other bomber in the American fleet. And while there are only 19 B-2 bombers in existence, there are 45 B-1s available to fly missions night after night. When you're running a campaign that hit more than 300 targets in the first 3 nights alone, you need an aircraft that can keep flying at that pace. The B-1 can do that. The B-2 simply cannot. None of what we just talked about works without something far less exciting: logistics. Nobody makes videos celebrating supply chains and refueling schedules, but every single strike depends on them completely. Moving bomber squadrons, fighter jets, jamming aircraft, refueling tankers, ground crews, and thousands of pounds of bombs halfway across the world is not something you plan overnight. It takes weeks of careful movement, and it's the part of this war that almost nobody sees. In the early days of this campaign, several B-1 bombers reportedly took off from Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, flew across the Atlantic Ocean, crossed the Mediterranean Sea, reached their targets in the Middle East, dropped their bombs, and then flew all the way back home again, refueling multiple times in the air along the way. That is an enormous distance to fly for a single combat mission. Once bases closer to the region opened up for use, everything sped up, because bombers no longer needed that long chain of aerial refueling just to reach the fight. But flying into Iranian airspace safely is a whole separate challenge on its own. Before a single bomb can be dropped from a B-1 or an F-15E, someone has to clear a path through Iran's air defense systems first. This job falls to a mix of stealth fighters and electronic warfare planes working together to confuse and blind the radar systems that would otherwise be tracking every aircraft heading their way. F-22 and F-35 stealth jets slip through contested airspace largely unseen, giving pilots a clear picture of what's happening below. At the same time, dedicated jamming aircraft flood the airwaves with so much noise that Iranian radar operators can't get a clean, reliable picture of what's actually flying toward them. Only after that picture gets scrambled does it become safe to send in a heavy bomber flying a slow, predictable path toward its target. The jamming side of this deserves extra attention because it's the part of the operation nobody sees, and it might be the most important piece of the whole puzzle. Growler aircraft, built specifically to jam enemy radar and communication systems, fly ahead of and alongside every strike package, essentially blinding Iranian defenses at the exact moment it matters most. Add to that a special radar hunting version of the F-16, a jet whose entire job is to detect the second an Iranian radar switches on, and fire a missile that follows that signal straight back to its source, often before the operator even realizes he's been spotted. Put those pieces together, and you start to understand why Iran's air defenses have struggled to land a single clean shot on any of these strike packages over 13 nights. It's not that Iran's defenses stopped existing. It's that the moment they try to actually do their job and light up a target, they instantly become the target themselves. Now let's talk about what all of this bombing has actually produced on the ground, because the locations matter here. A huge share of this campaign has focused on the islands and coastal positions Iran has used for years to threaten shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Places like Bandar Abbas, Keshem Island, and Greater Tunb have all been hit repeatedly, specifically targeting the coastal missile systems that give Iran the power to threaten one of the most important shipping routes on the planet. This isn't random targeting. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil shipped by sea passes through that strait, and Iran has spent years building exactly the kind of weapons needed to threaten it whenever it wants leverage. And Iran hasn't only relied on missiles. Reports over the past few days say Iran has kept placing naval mines throughout parts of the strait, daring both commercial and military ships to sail through water it no longer fully controls, but still wants to make dangerous. That's exactly why the blockade against Iran matters just as much as the bombing campaign, maybe even more. Reports over the last several days say more than a dozen ships tied to Iranian shipping have been redirected, several disabled completely, and a couple boarded and inspected before being cleared or turned away. This part of the pressure campaign doesn't produce dramatic explosion footage, but it may matter even more to a government that depends heavily on oil money to fund its military and keep control at home. Cutting off that money, ship by ship, adds up in a way that a single night of air strikes never could on its own. Before we move into how this pause might actually end, it's worth pausing on something important. Real people are flying these missions, arming these bombs, and standing guard on these ships. Some service members have been killed carrying out these operations on more than one side of this conflict. That's not a small detail buried under the footage. It's the part of this story that should never get lost, no matter how far away the explosions look on a screen. So, why did the strikes actually pause right now? Officials have been fairly open about the sequence that led here. First came sanctions pressure that crushed Iran's economy. Then came nearly 2 weeks of nightly bombing that tore through large parts of Iran's military infrastructure. Only after both of those things happened did the diplomatic door reopen, with Iran suddenly showing more willingness to actually sit down and talk. That order matters. Nobody negotiates from a position of strength after watching their coastal defenses, missile storage, and drone sites get hit night after night for nearly 2 weeks straight. But let's be fair about what Iran still has left, because pretending they have nothing would be misleading. Even after this bombing campaign, Iran's ballistic missile stockpile is still believed to number in the thousands. That capability has been weakened, not wiped out. Iran has kept firing missiles and drones at targets in the region throughout this campaign, and while most of them get shot down, some still get through, and a few of those have caused real casualties among American and Allied forces stationed nearby. There's also a deeper problem that doesn't get talked about enough. Even with its conventional military badly damaged, Iran has spent decades building relationships with armed groups scattered across the region. Those relationships, along with the weapons, money, and training behind them, don't disappear just because a bunker on the coast got destroyed. So even if Iran's own missile and drone stockpiles keep shrinking, the wider network of pressure Iran can apply through others doesn't necessarily shrink at the same speed. That gap is exactly what keeps military planners worried. Now, let's quickly look at a few other things happening around the world right now, because a lot is moving outside of Iran too, and some of it connects back to this exact story. In Eastern Europe, Romanian fighter jets have shot down an unidentified drone over Romanian waters near the Black Sea, marking the third day in a row that Romania has brought one down. That's notable, because before this stretch, Romania had gone more than 4 years without a single confirmed shootdown, despite sitting right next to an active war zone. Romanian officials have identified at least one of these drones as an Iranian-designed model, the same type Russia has used repeatedly to strike Ukraine. That overlap isn't a coincidence. There have been growing reports, including comments from Ukrainian officials, suggesting Russia has been quietly helping Iran with targeting support and intelligence throughout this conflict. Think about the incentives here. Every interceptor missile that gets used shooting down an Iranian missile in the Gulf is one less interceptor available to help Ukraine defend against Russian attacks. It's a low-cost way for Russia to keep America distracted and stretched thin without directly widening its own war with the West. So, zooming out, the real question underneath all of this is simple. Does Iran actually want a deal, or does it just want time? Everything in the regime's recent behavior points toward trying to create leverage it doesn't really have anymore, landing even a few hits on American or Allied targets, even while its own military gets dismantled night after night. It gives Iranian leadership something to point to at home and something to bring to the table, so the conflict doesn't look completely one-sided. But the numbers tell a different story. 13 nights of sustained bombing plus a working blockade is not a position of strength, no matter how loud the messaging out of Tehran gets. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Does this pressure actually lead to a real negotiated deal? Or does it start cracking the regime's grip at home in a way that opens the door to real internal opposition, especially in a country that's been cracking down hard on its own protesters while fighting a war on multiple fronts at the same time? Governments like this rarely collapse from one single blow. They wear down slowly, they lose the ability to project strength abroad, they lose the ability to keep basic stability at home. And eventually, the gap between what the government claims and what people are actually living through becomes too wide to hide. So here's the real question going forward. If this pause holds and turns into a genuine deal, this could be the beginning of an actual off-ramp. But if Iran uses this pause the same way it's used pauses before, quietly rebuilding stockpiles and repositioning what's left, then this campaign almost certainly resumes. And given everything that's happened over the last 2 weeks, there's every reason to believe round 2 comes back heavier, not lighter.